Did you know that you can detect a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, through simple saliva or urine test? Yep. And today's guest, Adrian Harel, is the founder and CEO of the company behind that, Metacortex. Therefore, today we're going to talk all about traumatic brain injuries, definitions, causes, preventions, diagnostics, treatments, blah, blah, blah. Enjoy it. Here you are. Have fun. Don't bump your head while listening to this episode. Watch your feet. Don't fall. It's Adrian Harel. Okay, so your company has developed this kind of technology that can detect via saliva and urine, basically, if someone has had a traumatic brain injury. We'll get into the actual technology here in a bit, but first, let's kind of slow down and say, what even is a traumatic brain injury?
This is a fantastic question. Unfortunately, it's not easy to answer it because it is a quite complicated physiological event. I will start by saying that it can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. We are a little bit too cocky and we do not understand that head injury is totally and completely irreversible. I don't know if we have to blame regeneration failure on God or evolution or whatever, but we are incapable to regenerate neuronal cells that have died. So any injury to the head, not only that it will trigger immediate cell death, the components that are being released from the dead cells will actually generate something called secondary degeneration, which is the death of surrounding cells that have been exposed to toxic materials that were in the cells that were injured, and now after breaking down, they are spilled to the environment and kill other cells. Brain injury mainly is considered or seen after fall. People are falling down, whether slipping the stairs, whether it is an icy road, lose of balance, taking some medication that change the perception of depth and speed and direction. So according to, if I remember correct, the CDC, up to 50% of the head injuries, or what we call concussions, will be due to falls. The rest of the 50% are distributed between things like injuries from sport. Most of the contact sports are causing head injury, and unfortunately, this is not a one-time event. Those are what we call repeated head injuries, which by themselves have their own cascade of deterioration. We have people that are being injured in car accidents, motorcycle accidents, meaning day-to-day life where people are just facing an surprised injury. There are countries where bicycle riding does not require helmets, and it's very easy to see ambulances running from the site of the fall injury to the hospitals. And there are, of course, those what we don't like to talk about, but this is the major community, which are soldiers. Soldiers are being exposed to blast and explosions, and those are what we call closed head injuries. Unless a person has an X-ray vision, he cannot see the damage to the neuronal tissue. The skull may be completely intact, but the inner part of the brain probably has suffered an injury. I think that the classical example is the 350,000 American soldier that were misdiagnosed as having PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and actually upon further investigation, due to the fact that they have not responded to psychiatric drugs and conversations with professionals, it was found out that the majority of them have suffered an actual traumatic brain injury. This is a short answer.
But there are different kind of degrees of kind of force to the head, right? Different levels of traumatic brain injuries. From what I understand, concussions are kind of a little bit less strong in terms of degrees, and I thought they were. You could recover from concussions, but maybe I'm wrong because you said we can't. Yeah, tell us more about the different levels of traumatic brain injuries, head traumas, whatever they're called, and what concussions are. Can we just not recover from any of them? Tell us about the kind of different levels of them.
Okay, so you're pushing me to an area which is greatly debated, and if we were to present this talk in a conference, I would assume that 50% of the audience will throw at me eggs and tomatoes, and the other 50 will support me. There is no clear-cut definition of traumatic brain injury, and there are many books and articles and scientific articles and medical papers where this subject is being argued and discussed, and you can use any bad word that you want in this regard. Yes, like in everything else on planet Earth, everything has a scale. And the most classical separation is what we call mild, severe, and what we are looking at is the moderate. But the medical community has also developed something called Glasgow Coma Score, which is a neurological evaluation of the patient upon arriving to the emergency room or hospitalized already in the department of neurosurgery. And the expert neurologist will perform a set of tests, which are a combination of uh, responses, physiological outcome, behavioral and cognitive capabilities. And based on that, he will categorize the patient in the different degrees. All those methods and others are very subjective. Doctors have been trained in different countries, in different schools. There is a language barrier, there is a cultural barrier. Many of the more severe injured patients do not communicate with you, or their injury makes it impossible for them to communicate with you. Either they lost the ability to talk, or they have their memory depleted or erased, or temporarily suffer from amnesia. So all those tests in which the observation is made by a human being are subjective. Yes, there is another level, which are the CT, the MRI, simple X-ray, or more sophisticated imaging techniques, but those require an actual patient being taken to the hospital and being exposed to those irradiations or procedures. MediCortex decided to focus only on their non-hospital methods to diagnose traumatic brain injury. And for that reason, we are talking about people falling down on the street, people being involved with a car accident, soldiers that are being exposed to a blast or an explosion. You need an answer now, immediately. And it really doesn't matter if the injury is mild, severe, moderate. Once you have a brain injury, you really want to be diagnosed, and that the next medical team that will take care of you will be aware that you may develop intracranial pressure or edema or other complication depending on where the injury happened and what medication are you taking and what is your genetic background that may completely change the course of the injury. Regarding your question about regeneration, yes, this is also a very complicated and debated area. I'm coming from a old-fashioned training in which we have been told, and I am repeating it, there is no regeneration in the central nervous system. I have never seen in my 67 years one person regaining his sight after having an optic nerve injury. I have never seen one person starting to walk after his spinal cord was severed. And I have not seen any head injured patient that suddenly regained his lost capabilities. Whether a situation can improve? Yes. Our brain has its own plasticity, and we have some functions which other parts of the brain or the other half of the brain can take over. But those are not regenerations, those are compensations due to the need to continue to stay alive and to perform the daily tasks. So some of the things can be rewired or reconnected or change their route so that signals will come in, but it's not regenerating in the essence of the word, generating new neuronal cells, replacing those that were injured. I hope I answered.
You mentioned things like PTSD and communication and memory problems, and there are probably a lot more. What are some common areas or regions of the brain, networks, whatever you want to call them, that tend to get basically damaged during these events? I know it probably depends on the event, but humans tend to move in certain ways. There probably is some kind of pattern.
I I have not researched this area of the more abandoned or common areas of injury, and the reason for that being very simple. There is a motto or a sentence that we all use: there are no two head injuries alike. So
Hmm.
every person is coming with his own genetics. We have different bone structure, we have different background from genetics, we're taking different medication, we have different weight. The severity of the injury is not proportional to anything. It's not only falling, it depends on where did you fall, what hit you, for how long you've been in this situation, and so on and so forth. Since the head is kind of round, we tend more to hit the back of our head and a little bit less the front part. But for example, motorcycles, 90% of them, I would assume, are the sides, depending on which side you
Oh.
are falling. The outcome of the injury is completely, to my opinion, again, I'm saying my opinion, I'm not an expert in that, is random.
Hmm.
It depends what you hit, for how long, and how severe. Two people that will look to you the same, one can be almost without any signs and one can die the next day. So it's very, very difficult to say. PTSD is a completely unrelated medical situation. It has nothing to do with the head injury. Some
Okay.
signs may be overlapping, but one of the ideas that I had behind Medicortex was to give to the paramedics and the ambulance team and the first responders a tool that will immediately remove the doubt that this is a head injury and not a PTSD. So a patient will not have to suffer for many years, talks with a psychiatrist or taking psychiatric drugs wherever they offer him, but he actually suffered from a brain injury, which is a completely different way to treat it.
Okay, let's just get straight to it then. Tell us about this tool or this technology that you and Metacortex has developed.
Okay, so we need to be very careful and say that we are under research and development. We still do not have the product launch on the market. The idea, as I said, was not mine. The person behind it was President Barack Obama. He challenged the neurobiologists to come up with, I think it was 5 different tasks. One of them is on the battlefield, immediate diagnostics of brain injury. I took it one step further and I said it should be non invasive. I don't want to start taking blood or spinal cord fluid. I want it to be a what we call liquid biopsy, non invasive. In this case, we focused on saliva and urine. Both of them have their own advantages and disadvantages, but this was the kind of the thinking behind the product. Like many research, we have to start with an animal model that will mimic the human situation as best as you can, learn from it, and try to show that your findings in the animal world are relevant to human beings. And this is exactly what we did. We have identified a biomarker, a molecule that is being released by the brain immediately after the injury, and it is actually present in both the urine and the saliva. When we went to human beings and we got permission from the ethical committee here in the city of Turku, and we have tested 12 healthy volunteers and 12 head injured, we found the same biomarker in human beings. This was a great achievement because people were very skeptical whether something that you found in a rat is relevant to a human being. We followed the first clinical trial by a bigger clinical trial where we have included not only head injured and control non-injured, we added a third group, which are orthopedic injured patients, meaning people that fell down but broke their hand, their leg, their pelvis, but not the head. Because the idea behind it was whether other injuries caused to the body may overlap or mask the response of the brain to the injury. And the answer is no. We have shown that even though a person is breaking his hand or his leg or pelvis or his arm, this event is not causing any disturbance in the identification of the brain injury. The next clinical trial was actually one of the groups that we have targeted the development for, which are children. The idea behind it was that you do not want to take a child to a hospital for many reasons. First, you have exposed him to other sick people. Both CT and MRI will require the child to be drowsed, anesthetized, because he's not going to sit for half an hour without movement. So you're adding one level of complexity. And of course, you expose him to radiation. So if we give a tool to a mother or a father to test very quickly a saliva sample or a urine sample and then make a logical decision, do I take my child to the hospital or is it okay to keep him at home and in the morning go to our physician or think about it later? So this was one of the thoughts behind it. To make a very long story short, we have identified the biomarker, we have learned its structure, we made it in a synthetic way, so we have vials of this biomarker, and we are now in the process of developing several methods of binding. And people are familiar with monoclonal antibodies, people are familiar with different methods. For example, when we had the COVID test, we have used monoclonal antibodies. There are other methods. And the idea is that by the beginning of the next year, I would say somewhere in first quarter of 2024, we will have a working prototype where we can actually test in the emergency room. We will collect human samples, both urine and saliva, test them on the device, and see whether we are capable of uh, getting a high percentage of correct identification, and our what we call false identification is very, very low.
Okay. Yeah, this is some hardcore science that I didn't study yet. So I want to understand what is kind of going on in the brain that ends up in the saliva, that ends up in the urine. What is this biomarker? Like, how does that connect to that actual injury to the brain, the neuron or whatever? Can you explain that process to the
Yes.
science dummies?
Yes and no. First of all, the no is because we do not know 100% what is the source of this biomarker. There are other biomarkers that have been identified and are being used nowadays as signals of the traumatic brain injury, but they are all proteins that are present in the blood. So now I'm taking one step back and I'm explaining, as you said, a little bit more complicated science. Our brain is surrounded by something called BBB, blood-brain barrier. In a way, you can see it like a very dense mesh around our brain, protecting it from anything coming in and nothing comes out. It has a evolutionary advantage and disadvantage, but we will not touch it. As long as this cover or membrane or balloon protects the brain, we cannot assume having a brain injury. Our hypothesis is that this blood-brain barrier is broken upon having this concussion or mild traumatic brain injury. This allows things that happen in the brain now leaking out and being present in the rest of the body. And what is this biomarker? We believe that this is and again, I have to use a complicated definition. It's called a biodegradation molecule, meaning it's a molecule that was cleaved or cut from a bigger molecule Usually, those molecules do not meet each other, which we are calling substrate and an enzyme. But when the cells are broken in the process of traumatic brain injury, those enzymes and substrates suddenly meet each other, and the enzyme does what you know what to do, is cleaving this substrate, and this smaller molecule, now that the blood-brain barrier is open, can leak out. The first fluid that it will meet is what we call CSF, the spinal cord fluid. This is the yellow fluid that we have around our skull and into our spinal cord. But this fluid interacts very closely with the blood. Everything that is in the blood also goes through the kidneys, and we find them in the urine. So those small molecules that we are targeting could not be identified if the person is intact, if the person did not suffer the brain injury, because the molecule will not come out. It will stay in the brain, or actually it will not even be made if there was no real injury. This is in a way getting us to the first question that you asked: how do we define traumatic brain injury? And I have presented this hypothesis to a sport meeting about traumatic brain injury, and they loved it because the arguments before that were like you asked: what is the difference between mild traumatic brain injury, concussion, moderate, and severe? Any injury is an injury. For one person, it's the end of his life. For another person with identical injury, can be nothing. So, how do you define it? So, I propose this definition saying that as long as the integrity of the blood brain barrier was not broken, this is sub injury. It's not a real injury. Everybody is getting his head bumped against a shelf or something in the house. You don't die. You don't even
Yeah.
remember it the next day. But if you fell down from the bicycle, or you slipped on the ice, or you have been trained in boxing, and now you have the brain moving within the skull, hitting the sides, and the neuronal cells were broken, and the blood brain barrier was ruptured, yes, then you'll see the biomarker. And we can see the biomarker quite fast. I'm talking about minutes after the injury in both the saliva and the urine.
And I don't know exactly how the blood-brain barrier works, but it's not like it just completely disappears. It's like a little hole gets in it, or a little
Yes,
tear gets in it. How would you explain this as a sort of metaphor? And how much of damage needs to be done to the blood-brain barrier in order for these biomarkers to be released?
I don't think there is anyone that has done any such investigation to answer your question. The blood brain barrier cannot, at least I am not capable of explaining it in a much easier way, except of saying it's a balloon.
Okay, it's like a balloon.
It's an invisible balloon that is surrounding the brain tissue and keeps it protected from the environment and
Yes.
protecting it from leaking out things that you don't want to have in your body. But not like a balloon. If you have one needle hitting it, it doesn't mean that the whole balloon explodes. You can have an area where the injury occurred, where the uh, zipper, I would say, was
Hmm.
disrupted. Things came in and out, but the body has 2, 3, 5, 10 hours, and he will fix it again. This is a short window where the blood-brain barrier is open. It cannot stay open for longer time, because in cases where we have an open blood-brain barrier, people are starting to have infections and all kinds of brain complications that are due to the fact that now bacteria from the other parts of the body can climb through the blood to the brain and find a nice place where they are not attacked. So unless the body had this mechanism to fix the blood-brain barrier, any head injury would result in death. But this is not the case. The body is probably capable of very quickly fixing the blood-brain barrier and preventing further penetration of unwanted elements into the brain.
Okay, so it's kind of like the security fence around the brain, and there's a sort of a hole that all the bad guys know how to get in. This is a spot. This is a spot, so that they're coming in or they're coming out or whatever. That things are happening, but then this whatever place that has this fence around it, they're really good at patching that thing back up. It gets patched up almost like as quick as possible, and there's like efficient little machines that thing in our body that fixes that BBB.
I remember discussions, both philosophical and also religious ones. Why do we have this blood brain barrier? Because, on one hand, it's a negative thing. One of the reasons that we have the blood brain barrier is the reason that we are prevented probably from having this regeneration, because molecules cannot come in and cannot come out. But on the other hand, if we have a breakdown of the blood brain barrier, the rest of the body can be aware of problems or the need to help the brain fix whatever is wrong there. So the integrity of the blood brain barrier has an advantage and also a disadvantage. But as you said, the body probably has a very quick mechanism of fixing it. Otherwise, we will all suffer from infections and so on.
Does this mean that your tool has to act quickly? Like if you don't act quickly with it, then you won't be able to detect that stuff coming out of the BBB anymore. I'm just gonna call it BBB because it's kind of cool.
Yes. Yeah, that's okay. It's a very good question. And we've been asked this question many, many times. And I'm sorry to go back to the first question that you asked me.
Keep going back. Keep going back.
We target the company to give a tool to the paramedic, to give a tool to the parent, to give a tool to the nurse in the school or to the emergency ambulance team. We are not talking about coming 1 month after the injury and having a test. This is not a pregnancy test. This is not a prostate specific antigen that you can test anywhere you want, anytime you want. The tool needs to provide a quick answer. Yes, this person has suffered a brain injury. You do not give him a machine gun to continue fighting. Or this child fell down the stairs. No, you're not letting him now play a Nintendo or any crazy games or participate in sports for at least 2 or 3 weeks for him to recover. This is the question and answer that we are trying to answer. We are not developing a diagnostic tool for long term. Now, to answer your question, in the second clinical trial, we have measured or we have collected samples from patients that arrived from the moment they arrived to the emergency room until they were released from the hospital. So we do have a follow-up on the presence of the biomarker. But I admit we have done something that we should have thought before. Our test is yes and no. It's not quantitative. So we do not know to answer whether after 10 minutes after injury and after 10 hours after injury, do we see the same amount or do we have just a yes and no? We are now in the process of signing a contract with the other company, a Finnish company, where they are going to help us develop a device that will actually measure quantitatively the amount of the biomarker in the urine. So it's not going to be anymore a yes and no. It can be a way of answering your question. Is it only a little tiny injury and just go home and take a aspirin and a cup of tea and tomorrow you'll be okay? Or no, this is serious. Maybe you should be under supervision or for longer medical review to be sure that nothing bad happens to you during the night. So we have this device underway. It's a little bit expensive to develop something from scratch. This is a new indication. Nobody has ever before done it. We don't have a gold standard to compare ourselves to. We are a tiny company in a tiny country. So this is a huge challenge. But at the end of the process, we will have a simple yes and no handheld device like the corona test or the pregnancy test. But we will also have a device like the ones that people are using to measure glucose in their blood or ketones in their blood, where a sample is being put on the strip. You put it into the device and it will tell you how much of this biomarker you have so that you can either make your own decision or share it with your doctor and he will tell you, whoa, your situation became worse than yesterday. Maybe you should go to the emergency room and let them check whether there is any problem, complication, or something.
That's amazing. So even the first one, you basically getting this yes or no informs you a lot. You can say, okay, stop, don't go back on the sports field, don't go back on the battlefield, or whatever other field or place
Yes,
you shouldn't be going on. And then you could also send that person off to the doctor or someone else who can do other kinds of examinations or tests or something that may or may not help. But yeah, they can probably send it on the right path. And then the second one, yeah, like having this glucose monitor, like a heart rate monitor or something, that can be really informative too. To even better,
yes.
but of course, it's harder to make. Then we can kind of have this ongoing kind of knowledge of what's going on up there.
I want to jump in with another point that I would call it us, the Westerns, are a little bit spoiled. Um, we in the
Yeah.
West have a hospital, I would say anywhere between 20 minutes to 40 minutes from our home. But this is not the situation all over planet Earth. There are many countries and many areas where the nearest hospital can be 4, 5, or 6 hours away. And even if you get there, nobody can promise you that you'll have a functional CT or MRI. And even if they have it, nobody promises you that you have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a radiologist that will interpret the results and give you a diagnostics. So, providing to those areas a non electrical, not sophisticated, I mean, you don't need to be a PhD or an MD or a professor to read the yes and no in our device. So, providing such a kit to those remote areas can be a life saving, because now you know, yeah, I fell from the donkey, but I also broke my head. I have to go to the hospital. Oh, nothing happened. I bumped my head on the tree. Tomorrow is a new day, which is completely different than riding 6 hours to the hospital and finding out that it is closed or nobody knows how to treat you. So having such a device in, I would call it, uh, underdeveloped or not developed countries or areas, I think it will be a game changer for them.
Oh yeah, just tossing a few of those in their first aid kit for just in case when that kid falls off the, I don't know,
Donkey.
elephant, donkey, something. Because you cannot, there aren't all the CT, MRI technologies there, or not enough of them, not always available. It's expensive, lots of other problems. Plus, you also mentioned the sort of radiation problems, and there are other problems with that technology as
Right.
well. Also, it might not detect everything. Are there any sort of differences in terms of detection
Yes.
between yours and that? Like, is yours stronger, less strong, is it equal? How do you compare with the MRI and the CT scans in terms of detectability or sensitivity?
I will not be a professional person to answer at this stage because I will explain to you why. But we know already, and
Okay.
there are hundreds of articles that say that in the mild traumatic brain injury, which are account for around 90% of the total number of head injuries, 90% of those are missed by the CT and MRI, which means that
Mm.
even though you fell, even though you lost your conscious, even though you were taken to the hospital, they did not find the injury and you've been released home. In the PowerPoint presentation that everybody can see on our website, you have an example, a local person, an elderly person, jogging in the morning, the month of March, if I remember correct, slipped on the ice, hit his head on the pavement, taken to the hospital. They performed the CT or an MRI, and he was released home. And I said, no way on earth. No, I don't accept it. We asked him to come to the company. We measured his biomarker in both the urine and the saliva, and it was way higher than people that are hospitalized in the department of neurosurgery with confirmed head injury. So we sent him back to the hospital, and this time they did a high resolution MRI, and they said, yes, Medicortic was right. You have a frontal lobe necrotic area, and we missed it first time. So this person going to sleep at night will not wake, and everybody will say, hey, he died because he was an old person. They will forget that yesterday he fell down and hit his head. But there is no record of it because he was released home without any problem. So this is one case. I don't want to conclude that everybody
Yeah.
is being untreated or mistreated or undiagnosed, but having 90%, and those are numbers that I did not invent, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles about it. 90% of the mild traumatic brain injuries are misdiagnosed, are completely undiagnosed by CT and MRI.
But wouldn't the person still kind of notice it? They'd be dizzy, or they'd be vomiting, or they'd have vision problems or something, where they'd be like, something's off, and it would kind of get addressed through that.
All those symptoms are correct. They can appear, but they also not appear. And in many cases, the
Hmm.
symptoms that you're talking are of a little higher degree of injury, where it will be quite obvious, even for a young doctor, to diagnose them without the CT and MRI. Because if a person has a blurred vision, or a loss of balance, or dizziness, or hearing voices or sounds, you don't need to be a big professor to understand that he had a brain injury.
Yeah.
But most of the cases where the person is under shock and he is not properly responding and is being sent home, symptoms will appear 2 or 3 days later. Will he go back to the hospital and say, 3 days ago I had a head injury? What about the fact that he had an amnesia? Maybe he forgot about it.
Yeah. What are the risks of not knowing that you've had a brain injury? Because I mean, I think we've all had these cases where we've bumped our head on a pole, or we've fallen down, or we've all had goose eggs as
Yeah.
kids that are on our head. But am I okay? Did I bust something? We don't really know. What are the risks of just letting it go by undetected, not taking your test, or not getting it detected by an MRI or CT scan, for example?
You're asking very tough questions, and I will have to give you a very complicated answer. And again, I will start with the end.
Yes.
Uh, when people are examining heads, or better say brains, of NFL players, they do not find one little injury. They find hundreds and thousands of small injuries that, if you accumulate them together, are a huge problem for this person during his life.
Yeah.
So when a person is looking at the Eddie Murphy, I think, movie Concussion, and they see that all those uh, NFL players, or ice hockey players, or boxing players, or rugby players are suffering on a daily basis repeated head injuries, their brain looks like, I don't know, like a mesh. There are more empty holes than actual brain tissue. So those are actual damages to the brain. Unfortunately, as of today, there are no real good treatments to prevent it. And if you remember, I mentioned President Barack Obama. The second task that he challenged the neurobiologist was exactly this one. He said, can anyone develop a medication or a treatment to prevent, halt, or stop the secondary degeneration? And you now that you are an expert in secondary degeneration, this is the long term effect initiated by the initial injury, where the chemicals released from the broken cells are now spreading in circles and killing healthy, non injured cells. And the answer to that is, well, again, if one looks at Medicortex PowerPoint presentation or plan, there are at least two patents protecting new chemical entities that we have invented with this exact purpose, that a person will be treated to prevent the secondary degeneration. More than that, the molecules are sophisticated so that a person can take the drug before, prophylactic, meaning if you know that you're going to drive a Formula One car and you have chance of 50% to hit your head on the car, you should take the medication before you get into the car. And if you're a soldier going to battle, yes, you have to swallow the pill 1 hour before you go, that if, and God forbid, you are being exposed to an explosion, your brain is going to be protected from time zero, and then you'll get treated in the hospital. So we do have patents, we do have molecules synthesized, we do have some good data, but for a 8 people company in small city of Turku, in a small country of Finland, it is beyond our capabilities to develop such a drug. I hope one day we will have sufficient fundings to do it, but we do have both patents and chemicals and the ideas how to prevent, or how to stop the secondary degeneration to prevent the long term effect. But as of today, The tool that we are providing is mainly a diagnostic one. For example, mass casualties, you have to prioritize evacuation. A building collapsed, there was an earthquake, you have now 100 people lying in front of you. Who goes on the helicopter? Who goes in the ambulance? And who can stay and wait for the next round? Unless you're Superman and you can have an X-ray vision and see who has brain injury or not, this kit can help you make a decision. Yes, this person broke his hand, his leg, but also he suffers from concussion. So yes, he has to be taken away by a helicopter as fast as possible. Whereas the other person that just had a small bump on his head but does not have a brain injury can wait for the ambulance. So the kit has a very important role in eliminating the need to prioritize evacuation based on a guess. A person will have an actual data in front of him to make a reasonable medical decision who should be treated first. And this is a really, really, really important, not only on big events of mass casualties, but in the, and I'm bringing the army again because both the conflict between Ukraine and Russia and Israel and the Palestinian, people approached us. Can you provide us 10,000 units of your kit? Can you send us 50,000 units of your kit? Because there are cases where a paramedic must make a decision on the spot. He cannot start now asking for an helicopter or an ambulance to come and pick him and take him to the hospital, and then he will be flown to the next hospital. By then, he's dead. And even if you have a soldier that suffered a brain injury, will you really trust him with a machine gun? He may turn around and shoot in the other direction without knowing it.
Yeah. So there's this speed, there's this kind of portability, the size. There's a lot of good benefits to this. So you have probably the cost is eventually going to go down. You said that there's no treatment for traumatic brain injuries. Of course, some will debate about that, but we'll just say that's the case. But you did say there are ways to kind of get better, to sort of decrease the harmful effects, to kind of feel as if we are getting better. What are some sort of behavioral things we could do, or nutritional things, or maybe supplements, or other or drugs, or what are some ways to kind of make it less bad?
You are putting me here on the barbecue grill. The literature and the folk literature has thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of miracle medications, miracle herb,
Uh-huh.
medical treatments.
Well, which ones do you
None,
think work?
none,
None. Yeah.
unless it is a drug that underwent clinical trials approved by the FDA or by the European Union or any other authority,
Mm-hmm.
a double-blind controlled placebo with clear-cut results and all the parameters monitored, I will not believe it.
Yeah.
There are anecdotal um, treatments that showed improvement. And I would not specify which one, first of all, because I don't know who is listening and how he will take it. It may be
Yeah.
dangerous because it may be drug interaction. It may be,
Yeah. This is not advice,
yes.
but and I want to steer away from drugs and supplements as much as possible. But yeah, mention these first as with a warning. Okay, this is just like maybe, but don't try it, kind of thing. Yeah, go ahead.
So if one goes to any hospital data about traumatic brain injury, most of them will recommend rest, meaning keeping the body in
Hmm.
as less motion as possible, minimal exposure to triggering eye vibration, meaning no games, no disco, no anything that can stimulate vision shocks or light.
Yeah.
Maybe quiet if it's possible. Uh, Nutrition has an impact, and I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just giving you the way of my thinking.
Yeah.
As we talked about the traumatic brain injury and the need to regenerate cells, membranes are being made from cholesterol. So fatty acids, which have a role in membrane production, membrane regeneration, may play a role. I'm just throwing an example:
Yeah.
omega 3 or cholesterol or MCT, things that
Uh-huh.
people may understand that they have a role in the brain. but no one has ever proved, because again, every traumatic brain injury is different. Every person
Mm,
is different from the other. That if you take vitamin X, you're going to be okay, or if you don't take this drug, you're going to recover faster.
yeah.
I think that unfortunately, even though I'm a scientist and I'm leading breakthrough areas, I still think that consulting each one his own doctor is the best way, because the doctor that treats you knows which other medications you're taking, which other
Yeah.
physiological complication you're suffering from. So by taking the wrong supplement or the wrong vitamin or the wrong food additive, you can cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
I think that there is a general understanding that rest
Yeah.
um, is important, to give to the body the time that it needs to regenerate.
Mm,
In order for regeneration, you need to provide the body with appropriate building blocks, which are the nutritional, good, healthy food. But I'm not aware, and I'm saying it because I'm a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I'm not aware of any actual treatment or medication that can improve, facilitate, accelerate brain recovery.
yeah, from the scientist or doctor perspective, yeah, there might be nothing, but maybe from the sort of everyday person, maybe this might work. It seems like it should work. Things like sleep and certain nutrients, kind of just general healthy things we all know about, probably shouldn't hurt at least, and probably would at least help. You would think.
I think that in such a period, one should really pay more attention to eating, as you mentioned, healthy food.
Yeah.
I would say even healthy food in the direction of as less processed as possible,
Mm,
as less as possible artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial chemicals, and so on. Stick with the basic natural meat, vegetables, and so on and so on. I think that what you mentioned, the sleep, is very well recommended. I think the numbers are anywhere between 8 to 10 hours after brain injury, so that you give the
yeah.
body the time to recover and very slow return to normal daily life, daily activities. Of course, if the injury was strong enough and the person is suffering from very bad ability to understand speed and direction of movement, he should not uh, fly his helicopter or drive his car or use his motorcycle, because he will be involved with car accident the next day.
Yeah.
Actually, there are very strong statistical points that one can look. And again, I don't remember because you have not prepared me for that, but to my opinion, the chance of having a second brain injury after the first one is 6 times higher
6 times higher.
than a normal person having the first one. So you have 600% of having a second brain injury after the first one than if you didn't have any at all.
Mm,
And from what I heard from people that are in contact with me, it can be as simple as putting the leg wrong when you go down the stairs, because of this problem of the first injury, that the perception of depth and distance is incorrect. You put the leg, there is no stair there, and you fall down.
yeah.
So this is very common uh, in the groups that I'm part of and the group that I'm managing on LinkedIn. People are reporting second and third and fourth and fifth. Actually, this morning, a person reported 6 independent sequential head injuries. 6.
Yeah, when I'm talking to you, I keep remembering back about this friend I had. I've known him since high school. He played football. He got a couple concussions from football. He got in a couple car accidents, and now he's pretty seriously altered from it. He's on disability. He can't really work quite the way he did before. He gets headaches, all kinds of problems. And so, yeah, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is sort of this short term, the immediate days following the event. What kind of advice would you give to someone like that who's had multiple head injuries throughout their life, and maybe the most recent one was a year ago or 2 years ago? It's sort of this longer term horizon. What would you recommend for someone like that to do.
Again, I don't think I'm in the right position to give you an answer. Again, just because I'm a simple scientist doing research in the lab and I'm not
Yeah.
a physician, and every case is
Uh-huh.
different from the others. But they are what you said by yourself, common sense things.
Yeah.
Maintaining a very organized life pattern with a very tight schedule, having the best food you can have with the least amount of toxic compounds will give your body the time it needs to recover or regenerate or replace broken things. But if I'm not completely wrong, there is no regeneration of the brain. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, riding a bicycle without a helmet is stupid.
And people do it all the time. I'm here in
Yes.
Japan. Nobody wears a helmet. I'm thinking, what are you guys doing? You're nuts.
Okay.
But that's what they're doing. It's crazy.
Playing dangerous contact sports where you know for sure that there is a head injury, being the American football, boxing, ice hockey, rugby, and so on and so forth, you need to be aware that there is a chance of head injury.
Yeah.
I was sitting in a conference near a person from the United Kingdom, and he told me, Adrian, if I knew when I was 16 what is brain injury, I would never be a professional boxer. But nobody told
Yeah.
me. I played, he said. I made a lot of money. I had a lot of girlfriends. I was very famous and very well accepted. But look at me now. 7 years
Yeah.
later, my head is like a sponge. I cannot
Uh,
remember anything. I cannot do anything. Yes, I have money in the bank, but what does it help me? I cannot drive a car.
isn't worth it.
So he's young. He made a wrong decision. Nobody was fair enough to tell it to him. And boxing is hitting the head. Boxing
Yeah.
is not kissing and hugging each other. Okay? So anyone that is telling
Yeah.
you differently is lying. And a person should know about it. There are big risks.
And kids are jumping into this stuff and they don't really know about the true risks.
I would like to end this interview by, I don't want to call it a joke, but when I arrived to this area where I live now, I wanted to do a clinical experiment on children before they start
Yeah.
participating in the afternoon activities and few months later. And I picked kickboxing. Reasonable. It's an activity where children are going after school. They train for 2 hours and then they go home. And I wrote a letter to the person, they call it here commissioner. And I asked, if I bring you a permission from the ethical committee in the hospital to take samples of saliva and urine, which are non-invasive, from the children before they start training, and few months later, will you allow me? The official answer was, we are unaware of any head injuries in our sport. And I'm talking about kickboxing. Where exactly are you kicking? So, as long as people will continue to lie, and as long as people will continue to fight the information that there are dangerous sports, and
Hmm.
people should be aware of that, they can still make the decision to be famous and millionaires and make a lot of money and be part of the sport, no problem. But they need to be aware the risks that they are taking. And unfortunately, they're not being properly educated. And by the time they know it, it's too late.
Yeah. Before we leave, there's some data on this PDF that you sent me that I kind of want to share.
Please.
One is about the leading causes of TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
Number one is falls,
Yes.
48% falls. And then next is being struck by an or against an object, 17%. 13% is motor vehicle accidents. I thought that would be higher, but it's really the falls. Assault, 8%. And 14% is other stuff like blasts and explosions of firearms and stuff. Wow. But falls are the main sort of one, it looks like.
Yes.
What can people? It seems obvious how we can prevent falls, but obviously we keep falling. So, do we just not get old, or we start learning how to walk? What can we
Well,
do?
I think that people that are taking, for example, medication in elderly ages, where the medication have an impact on balance and perception of movement, should be very careful. because you see that there is a person shows some symptoms of disease, is being given medication, he falls down, breaks his hip, and then dies. So why
Yeah.
not stop it before?
Mm.
If a side effect of a medication is um, imbalance and loss of balance and the possibility of falling down, one should take all the precaution to prevent it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
the end is very unfortunately predicted.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The one other piece of data I wanted to share before we go. I know you wanted to end with your joke. I'm sorry, I ended your grand finale. Ruined that one. No, I'm kidding. The other one is about the number of new cases each year. It says
Yes.
here that there are 69 million traumatic brain injury cases globally each year, and it's not so surprising, but the numbers are quite alarming. Here, where the U.S. completely ranks number one at 2.8 million. Europe as a whole is 2.5 million, and outside of Europe and US, the numbers aren't very high unless there just wasn't data there for some reason. But it seems like my question is why so many cases in the US and Europe? I guess in Finland they might be slipping on the ice. You know, it's pretty cold over there. But yeah. Tell me about why the US and then why Europe?
Those two numbers, the 70 million and the 2.8 and 2.5, are completely different way of looking at the numbers. The 70 million
Okay,
is worldwide estimate of new cases per year. It
okay,
takes in consideration thousands and thousands and thousands of patients that never went to a doctor. They were never recorded or diagnosed with traumatic brain injury.
right.
They fell down, they were involved in a car accident, but then they went home. The 2.8 and
Hmm.
2.5 are actually cases where a patient entered the clinic and diagnosed and recorded as suffering from traumatic brain injury.
I see.
All the undiagnosed, all the misdiagnosed, all the people that fell in between are not within those 2.8 or 2.5. The 70
Right.
million is a number that was calculated independently by two groups of scientists doing statistical analysis and the tendency of suffering from brain injury.
Okay.
And of course, it's different in European countries than Middle East companies, South America versus Europe versus Southwest. There are different numbers, but the big number that you see, the 70 million, is an estimate of worldwide, everywhere. This is not an actual accessible market. As we talked before, maybe people are falling and breaking their head in Africa. Will Medicortex, the tiny small company, will be able to establish sales in Africa? I doubt it. Can we establish sales in South America? I doubt it. Yes, Canada is a good target because you have both a lot of population and people with the sports. Number one is ice hockey and falling on the ice. So yes, Canada is of course of interest to us, but there are territories which for us as a small company will be quite difficult to get a authorization for sales and whether it's even commercially viable for us.
Okay.
So yes, the number is huge. Of course, unfortunately, again, every time you hear about a war, the numbers are quadrupled.
Yeah, and if I did my math, I would have seen something missing there anyway. 2.8 plus 2.5 does not equal 69 million. So what you're saying is not it's not that people have more traumatic brain injuries in the U.S. or Europe. It's just that they're more detected because of the medical infrastructure, economy, etc.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly. People can go to a hospital or to a doctor which is capable of diagnosing traumatic brain injury. Whereas if you are in a far away place with very little medical available, they will miss it.
how can people learn more about your company, learn more about you, connect with you?
I'm not important whatsoever. I think that
Well,
the company Medicortex is the one that people should look at. We
yes.
have
Okay.
a website on Facebook, we have a LinkedIn page, and of course the company www.medicortex.fi, FI for Finland, is the main source of information. We are trying to keep it updated. There are articles there, we have presentations there, we have more, as you called it, popular explanation, not to make people frustrated, they don't understand what they are reading. But we also have scientists that are reading it and following it. So we must keep high level scientific articles and at the same time public information without too many Latin words and complicated information. So people are really invited to go to Medicortex and read more. And I think that just being aware of traumatic brain injury and ways to prevent it will give them a lot of satisfaction. When I look
Yeah.
through the window here and I see people on scooters and bicycles and rollerblades and all kinds of devices without helmets, I'm sad because they don't understand what they are doing. I can see them through the window, and in 1 minute, they're going to become vegetables or they're going to ruin their whole life. All their plans will go down the drain, and they're not using a helmet.
That brings me to one final question I've been wanting to ask too is what's sort of the personal pain or experience or story for you, Adrian, or other people behind Metacortex that gets you sad about this? It gets you thinking we have to fix this because it's not just a random company. You don't just make a random company. You clearly care about this. So what caused
Thank you.
what caused you to care about this so much?
Uh, Taking in consideration that this is not a personal interaction between me and you, I will have to keep it to the professional level and say
Hmm.
my whole training was central nervous system regeneration. And the parts of the central nervous systems are the optic nerve, spinal cord, and the brain. And 9.5, 10 years ago, when I heard President Barack Obama challenging the scientists, I took it as a personal target. I felt that as if he's talking to me directly. I sold everything that I had, my health insurance, my pension, my coin collection, my stamp collection, and opened the company in Finland. Why Finland? Because at the time, 10 years ago, the Finnish government offered a support to startup companies and provided them with the environment to start a startup. And now we are here 10 years later. We have received twice Department of Defense grants. We have received European Union grants. We have received, to my recollection, three times Finnish government support. We have 277 shareholders. So it means that we are doing something right. Uh, where are we going from here? I would like to have both products put on the market. I want to start getting letters from users that say, Adrian, you saved my life, or Adrian, my son would like to send you a picture because you saved his future. And I will be more than happy with that.
Yeah, just one or two of those stories would make it all worth it.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time today, Adrian. Thank you, Metacortex, also for developing this innovative new technology that no one else was, I don't think, was really making. I hadn't heard of this before. So this is great news. If you can get that stuff on the market, and you will sooner than later. That will save a lot of lives, and hopefully we'll get some of those letters from little Billy and little John
Yeah.
and Susie coming in with some tears from both people on them.
No, no, no. Just happy people.
Just happy tears, happy tears.
Yes.
Yes, of course. No, it's like 10 p.m. over here. I'm getting a little nutty. Time for me to sleep, probably. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.